All right. Hey, y'all. I think we'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome to Launching RCV Maps 2025 webinar presented by the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. I'm Tiffany Montemayor, and I'm the Senior Director of Implementation for RCV RC, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. For the best viewing experience, use Chrome, Firefox, Edge, or Safari for viewing the presentation. And the platform is also compatible with mobile devices. Close other applications, browsers, and tabs for optimal viewing. The chat box at the right of the screen is available for questions and technical support. Messages will go directly to the administrators of the webinar, and we will answer questions during the question and answer portion of the presentation. A little bit about us. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose mission is to help make ranked choice voting elections successful. And we work with stakeholders in jurisdictions across the country with the technical implementation aspects of RCV elections. For more information about our work, please visit our website at rcvresources.org. So today's agenda, pretty easy. What is RCV Maps? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the 2025 version because there were some previous versions. And then go over how have states changed. And then, of course, what's next for RCV Maps. And then we'll get into the Q&A. And now I'm going to introduce you to our policy team as our two presenters for this afternoon. Chris Hughes is the Senior Director of Policy and General Counsel for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. He's contributed to RCV legislation and regulation in more than 20 states, including laws passed in Maine, Oregon, and Virginia, and assisted with ranked choice voting implementations in dozens of jurisdictions, from Newton, Utah, with a population of 794, to New York City, with a slightly larger population. Chris also co-produces the RCVRC's podcast, RCV Clips, and Chris is admitted to practice law in the state of New York. Ryan Kirby is the Director of Policy for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, and he conducts research on election administration and drafts reports to support best practices for RCV implementation. Ryan previously served as the Chief of Staff for State Senator Cheryl Kagan in the Maryland Senate. Ryan is currently attending American University, pursuing a master's in public administration and policy. And I'm going to hand it over to Chris and Ryan.
Thanks so much, Tiffany, and thanks everybody for being here today. Like Tiffany said, we're going to be talking to you a bit about this project of ours called RCV Maps. RCV Maps is the primary research project of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. It's the place where we try and collect everything we've learned about ranked choice voting implementation and election administration in one place, in a easy to use and actionable set of information for users of the report. So beyond that, what is it? What is it doing? I'm going to give a high-level introduction, and then Ryan is going to really get into what's included and what we've learned writ large about nationwide ranked choice voting implementation questions later on in the presentation. But basically, it's a state-by-state analysis of election administration as election administration pertains to ranked choice voting. We have a particular focus on voting systems, on the equipment used to run ranked choice voting elections. But we cover a number of other topics in election administration as well that ranked choice voting touches on. And again, Ryan will get a bit into that. Because we love an acronym at the RCV MAPS stands for the Multi-State Assessment Project. But you can just call it RCV Maps. I think to do a bit of level setting, because we've got folks from across the country and across the election space here, a mix of election officials who are actually running ranked choice voting elections, running elections offices, ranked choice voting advocates, and any number of other folks on today. I wanted to just quickly define how the Resource Center thinks about election administration. This is an update to a definition I wrote a very long time ago when I was trying to make sense of election administration myself, studying it in a bit on the outside. But it has driven a lot of our work and how we try to create, and those sorts of reports and materials we create as an organization. Election administration is the acts and processes underlying the conduct of elections in the United States. It's come under intense scrutiny as political tensions in the US escalated over the last few years, and it's hierarchical and decentralized all at once. There's decisions happening in elections offices that then need to get communicated down to precinct poll workers. And those elections offices exist at the city level, at the county level, and frequently at the state level as well. So there's a huge array of folks involved in making this giant thing run. And at the end of the day, to us, election administration is infrastructure. It's the infrastructure of our democracy. It's the thing that makes our democracy run and why we have a democracy in the United States, which is what makes it so critical to us and so important to us to understand better, especially when you're trying to run a ranked choice voting election. So why did we make RCV Maps? This is actually the third edition of the project. The 2025 edition follows the 2021, which was our inaugural version of the report, and the 2023 versions of the report. And we've made updates and improvements every cycle. Again, Ryan will describe a bit more about that later, but ultimately, the reason we made RCV Maps is that we saw a gap. We saw that folks who were working on ranked choice voting campaigns to get it adopted were unsure where to start learning about ranked choice voting and election administration because questions about implementation come up again and again when you're working to get ranked choice voting adopted and after you maybe have won a campaign. And then election administrators themselves, folks we were working with on ranked choice voting implementations, also tended to have some common questions about what processes and procedures they needed to update to run ranked choice voting elections successfully in their jurisdictions. And so that's what RCV Maps is. It's pulling together all of the big best practices and lessons learned we've gained now in the last about decade of our existence as the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, so that folks across the country who are looking at ranked choice voting and what it takes to run a ranked choice voting election can get up to speed quickly on the best practices and core considerations you need to bring into your elections office when you're faced with running a ranked choice voting election. So how did we make RCV Maps? One, just a ton of research. We've read election code and election regulations from across the country in both ranked choice voting and non-ranked choice voting elections. We've also reviewed publicly available information from elections offices, again, from places that are running ranked choice voting elections or places just running any type of election in the US. And all of that was just about making sure we understood, here's some of the common things that exist across elections in the US. Here's the things that are going to vary by city, by county, by state. Because a core thing we're trying to find as an organization is what's the same, what's a thing that we know is going to come up again and again in ranked choice voting, and what are the things that are going to be unique and a novel problem to solve or hurdle to clear when you're implementing a ranked choice voting election. RCV Maps is about identifying that first bucket of things, getting you that baseline, that core set of things you need to know so that you can focus more on what are the novel things, what are the new things we're going to have to resolve in our city, our county, our state when we're running ranked choice voting. In addition to that, we interviewed stakeholders. We interviewed election officials across the country. We've interviewed ranked choice voting advocates, and we interviewed representatives from voting system vendors, among others. But those were our core people that we were talking to make sure we were being accurate and precise when we're talking about what it takes to run elections here in the US. And then finally, one of the big parts of RCV Maps is we have a section analyzing voting systems, analyzing the election equipment used across the country. And to get data on what every city or county or state is using to run their elections, we got data from Verified Voting's Verifier. Verified Voting is another nonprofit organization working on election integrity specifically. But their Verifier tracks that information across the country and is a great standardized way for us to know who's using what equipment. We can then apply our knowledge of what equipment has been used in ranked choice voting elections across the country, what election equipment has been certified by the EAC or some state body to run ranked choice voting elections. And then we can analyze it in these reports to say, yes, this thing can do RCV. No, this equipment cannot do RCV. Then, because this is a huge project, there's a report for every single state plus the District of Columbia. We created a template just of the basic things we knew were going to come up in every report, and then drafted some specific sections on top of that that are unique to every single state, like the voting equipment section that I've been talking about. And then as a final step, because we love feedback, we thrive on feedback, that's what will continue to make us succeed and give people information they need. We sought out feedback from local, state, and national stakeholders. The same folks we were interviewing, we sent around drafts of these reports to make sure that we were, again, getting it right, getting them the information that they were curious about. So that's RCV Maps to begin with. Now, Ryan is going to take you through a whole tour of the project itself and help you all get a little oriented to it.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that. So, assuming everyone here has seen it, but in case you want to know how to find it, RCV Maps is under the Tools section on our website, and it's now live on the State Assessment section. So if you've used RCV Maps before, it's the exact same spot. If you have it saved as a bookmark on your browser, you're still good to go. And so to preview some of the new features and some of the different things we've updated, before I go into a whole list of it, I'm going to try and share my screen with the RCV Maps website. There we go. Okay. Oop, that's a little too. There we go. Okay. So you should be able to see the State Assessments website. The top looks a little bit different. We tried to streamline a lot of the different components of the RCV Maps landing page just to make it a little bit more user-friendly and accessible. We've now also included the FAQ page right on the front. So if you have any questions about it, you can try to get to that pretty easily. Our What is RCV Maps fact sheet, as well as some additional resources, move them towards the top in case you want to access those. One of the big changes for this year's edition is that we have a new interactive map of the US that you can click through. And if you're looking for your state, just the high level information, you can click on your state and scroll through some of that information that we have here about RCV capability, the number of jurisdictions, voting equipment score, all of that great stuff. And you can also click directly to the state that you're looking for. You can also just try to compare and contrast. There's also a key if you're curious for what the different category colors mean. And so if you want to take a quick glance, you can see there's a lot of different types of blues. So a lot of great information here. And then if you are used to, or you don't want to go through the map, you also have the traditional click on the link directly below with the list. So we're going to look at Illinois for our example for what the new state page looks like. So we have our new updated cover photo here, lots of great graphics and good design there. You can see the buttons for the state assessment are right up at the top, very easy to find and not as far below. And we also have a new fact sheet that is one of the new things for 2025 with a lot of high level information. I'll also show you that in the couple of minutes. We moved some of the RCV readiness information to kind of the top level information, streamlined it a little bit, as well as tried to reorganize it so it's a little bit more user friendly. A lot of this is very similar to the information that's already on the interactive map, but it's just making it another place for you to find it. And you can also see the changes from the last year's edition, or 2 years ago, their edition as well. So going into our actual assessment, when you click on the assessment, you'll notice these are bigger documents. It's actually not as big as the 2023 assessment because we've made some changes to the way that we present some of the appendix tables, and I'll get into that in just a minute, but I promise you it's not as long as it looks. We have a table of contents here at the top in case you want to find something particular that you're looking for. In this example, I want to show you the voter education section. And a lot of this information, if you've looked at previous editions, is pretty similar, at least in the layout generally. But we have a lot of new graphics that are user-friendly, good kind of key takeaways as you're scrolling through. Not every section is very long. Voter education is only about 2 pages long. And it's got a really helpful graphic that's really helpful if you're an advocate or an election administrator thinking through some of the different components of voter education. One of the other things I want to flag for our assessments are the footnotes. Not only do we include all of the references to statutes or anything like that from our research, like Chris mentioned, we did a lot of research for each of these assessments, but there are additional resources that are available and useful for you throughout the assessment. So keep an eye on those. You'll see the footnotes linked throughout. So definitely keep an eye on those. Another section I want to highlight is the ballot counting section number 5, centralization. This is a little bit more in the weeds than some of the other ones. It's a little bit more lengthy. Still has graphics. It's not just a wall of text, I promise. We included some new information about centralization, both physical and digital. It's a little bit further down right here. So this is a new component of the 2025 assessment, just looking into how states physically or digitally centralize some of their election data, election results, and just providing some of that information to you. Another thing throughout the assessment is there were some considerations for multi-vendor versus single vendor, and this section has some tailored components to that. New graphics as well, just going through the reporting process. So really helpful information, we think, throughout. And then one of the last sections I want to show you is the voting systems. Looks pretty similar to the last edition. We didn't make a lot of crazy changes here. A little bit more information about the voting equipment certification process, as well as a new graphic here to both visually explain that as well. And you'll notice, same here from previous editions, that we break it down with the jurisdictions by RCV capability. So in Illinois, we chose this one on purpose because it has both RCV capable and non-RCV capable equipment. So just like before, it's broken down by each paragraph for each vendor and describes the number of counties and the equipment that they use. And then also noted here are the non-RCV capable number of counties. So pretty similar in that regard. And then again, same with the footnotes, keep an eye on those. And then as promised, it is not as long as it looks with the appendix. We removed the voter registration tables because they made it pretty lengthy in a PDF format. It's not the most useful. And so what we've done is we've included the spreadsheet data. So this time you actually have access to all the same data that Chris and I were using throughout the whole summer to create these assessments. And so I'll show you the Illinois one as an example, but you will be able to find that link in the voting system section, and it is in one of the footnotes. So it's also why it's important to keep an eye on those. But that is right here for footnote 76 for Illinois. And then you'll be able to take a look at all that data. But the other thing here is we also standardize the sample ballots in the appendix. So in every single assessment, there are the same sample ballots, which list all of the vendors and shows best practices as well as all of the different vendors. So if your jurisdiction is possibly moving to new equipment, you already can get a quick sense of what it is that RCV ballot might look like. So feel free to scroll through those at your leisure. So next, we have our brand new one-pagers or fact sheets. We have created one for every single state plus DC, and these provide a very high-level overview of that state. It's 2 pages on a PDF. You can print it double-sided. That was kind of our goal, is to make it a really easy handout if you needed to, for whatever purpose. And it includes a lot of that really high-level information from the actual assessment. We tried to include as many of those sections as we could, and as well as the voting system score right at the top, some of the most useful information, the voting system section with a lot of that statewide summary data, and then other voter education, ballot design resource, just kind of that high level stuff that we think the average person will need when kind of looking for that, just a little bite about the RCV Maps assessment. And then lastly, these spreadsheets. So this is the first time everyone gets to see these, but this is what Chris and I have been working off with all summer. So we have in the first tab is our master sheet. This is where all of the information that we use for our assessment lives, that we were making our kind of decisions. And this includes all of the voter registration information. It's several columns wide, as well as the voting equipment data. And this is kind of the stuff that Chris and I made based off of some of the other materials from either the state or verified voting. So from here, we would look at that jurisdiction's voting equipment, and then we would put it into different worksheets here with RCV capable and not RCV capable, and then hand count if it was a hand count there were any hand count jurisdictions. And so if you go to the RCV capable tab, these are only jurisdictions within that state that are RCV capable. So if you're looking for something specific in that tab, or that's just a different way to narrow it down. And then same thing with non-RCV capable. So in some places this will be longer, some places will be shorter. So if you want to know, hey, what are the 2 counties in Illinois that are kind of preventing it from being fully RCV capable, this is where you would go to get that information. And then lastly, I just want to highlight, Chris mentioned verified voting. We included all the data that we got from verified voting here. So you can, if you wanted to recreate all of the work yourself, you could, but this is also the source material that we were using, as well as the pivot table. This is just another way of looking at that exact same data. And then lastly, the registered voter data source. So these last couple of tabs are mostly just source material just to show you where we got everything. But otherwise, you really want to be focused on the master sheet as well as the RCV capable, not RCV capable, or hand count tabs. So that is everything for the website. Let me switch over and start sharing the slides again. All right. Okay. So now that you've seen where to access RCV maps and where to find it, we want to throw a poll out to the chat to try and figure out where everyone here is based and what everyone's RCV capability is with their state. So in another tab, if you can open up the RCV maps page, look for your state, and then fill out the poll with what your state's RCV capability score is, whether it's RCV ready, RCV capable, prepping for RCV, or has updates needed for RCV. And feel free to do that throughout the presentation. Let's see. So I want to first apologize for this slide being a giant wall of text. It is not normally what I like to do, but in this case, it was kind of the only way we could figure out to present all of this information. And I know I just showed you some of these changes, so I won't go belabor some of these too much. We have a new interactive map, and it provides that own at a glance information. And as I mentioned, it links directly to the state. So you can easily find a lot of that information there and then go directly to your state. And then with those fact sheets, those are brand new this year, as I mentioned. So you'll be able to print those out and use it as needed, or just quick refer to it for whatever you're working on in your jurisdiction. And then throughout the assessments, we have new graphics and visualizations that help, we think will make some of those hard to digest topics a little bit easier to go through, and also breaks up some of the text as well. And then we also have some additional RCV elections to work with. So we've updated a lot of the election results examples and some of those best practices, since we just have more RCV election results to work with and additional examples there. So I was going to make up for the wall of text with a couple of slides that have a lot of visuals. And so I'm going to go through a couple of charts that show some of the changes over time now that we've done RCV maps for a number of cycles. And I want to show first a bar chart and a line chart, but I want to go through what do these different categories mean. And you may have been wondering this when you were going through the poll and selecting what it meant for your state. So RCV ready, those are the places that are already either doing RCV or they have both the equipment and the software ready to go. So they could basically run an RCV election right now when it comes to voting system capability. The next is the RCV capable. Those are the places that have 100% of their jurisdictions have the hardware, so the physical equipment that they would need, but they still need some software behind the scenes, either an upgrade or something like that, to be able to do RCV. But the hard part of getting the hardware is out of the way. Prepping for RCV, those are the states that have some jurisdictions with RCV capable equipment and some mix of non-RCV capable equipment. And so they have some places that are ready to go and other places that still have to get that hardware. They might either be using legacy voting equipment or they might be hand counting their elections. And then the last section is updates needed for RCV. Those states have between 0 to 25% of RCV capable equipment, and they have a significant majority of jurisdictions that with either older equipment or they're hand counting their elections. So they have a little bit more work to do in order to become RCV capable. So in the bar chart and the line chart, you can see that the number of RCV capable jurisdictions has increased over time. And there was a big jump from our last update in 2023. But overall, you can see that a lot of good progress is being made. And if you still have Thanksgiving desserts on your mind, I have a couple of pie charts for you. So in 2021, the majority of states are in the prepping for RCV phase. And you can see that light blue makes up the majority of that pie chart. In 2023, we actually didn't see a lot of change. The one big thing was Alaska jumping up to RCV ready. But otherwise, there weren't a lot of big changes. And then 2025 marked the big increase in RCV capability. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, one of the reasons for that in a couple of slides. But just want to highlight that, that changed really quickly over just one election cycle, essentially. So next, this is a pie chart showing voter registration data that as we've been using in collecting data for all these jurisdictions, we have access to be able to try to compile that and just look at, so where do all these people live and what does RCV capability look like? And so I want to note that this is the vast majority of Americans live in RCV capable jurisdictions. We're looking at just about 94% of Americans. So that's pretty good. And one thing I want to highlight here is that we did lump non-RCV capable with both the equipment, the legacy equipment, and hand count jurisdictions. It was just such a small number that it didn't make sense to disaggregate them into this pie chart. Otherwise, it would just be kind of hard to read. And then next, looking at the jurisdictions. So this one's a little bit different. We're actually looking at just the counties, municipalities in this one. But what is their RCV capability? And so we broke this one out because it's a little bit easier just to see that. But you'll notice that hand count actually represents a much bigger share of the RCV capable jurisdictions, so those cities and towns, because there's just a number of places across the country that have, a couple hundred people here, a couple hundred people there, that it just doesn't make any financial sense for them to purchase or lease a voting equipment to do their elections every couple of years. So you'll notice that that's just a little bit different than the registered voter capability of pie chart. And I always just find it interesting in elections to look at the difference between jurisdictions, the land versus people, just an interesting comparison there. So looking at the state highlights, wanted to pick a couple places just to dive a little bit deeper in and show some of the changes that also explain what's going on nationally that we saw from 2023 to 2025. So in Connecticut, they had old Premier or Diebold equipment. So that was part of the legacy equipment. They just had stuff that was just old or needed to be replaced regardless of whatever they were planning to do with the ranked choice voting. And actually during our 2023 assessment drafting, we heard that they were planning to make changes, but they hadn't yet. So at that point, we couldn't classify them as anything other than needing updates with 0%. But since the 2023 assessment, they have upgraded their equipment to new ES&S equipment. And we wanted to highlight that they went from 0% to 100%, just like that. So it doesn't always have to be this incremental growth in some places. Obviously, Connecticut is unique in that it's a smaller state, but every state runs everything a little bit differently. Just wanted to highlight one of those differences. Oregon is another one that had a significant jump from 2021 with 39% RCV capability to 56% in 2023 and then 100% in 2025. Clear Ballot conducted its first RCV contest in Portland, and that was a big step for everybody involved, whether that was Portland City Government, Multnomah County, or the Clear Ballot, their vendor. Portland needed to implement RCV, and that ended up becoming significant nationally because Clear Ballot had not developed RCV capability yet. And so this kind of forced their hand a little bit, to move the ball forward. And so with their use of RCV and Clear Ballot in Portland, it actually increased the RCV capability in a lot of other states. That was one of the big reasons we saw states jump up to fully RCV capable. So one small change in one jurisdiction ended up having a pretty big national impact when you think of it this way. And then next, it would be remiss if we didn't mention Alaska and Maine, who are always worth highlighting because they're the two states that are actively conducting statewide RCV contests. Both states, they are really interesting because they have hand count jurisdictions. In both places, about a third of their local jurisdictions don't have voting equipment, so they conduct hand counts. And so both of these places have implemented workarounds to get their RCV data to a central location. And their assessments are unique compared to the others because we aren't describing what a hypothetical RCV implementation might look like. We're actually describing what their processes are. So it's really helpful from a historical documentation point of view, but also interesting if you're in a jurisdiction exploring ranked choice voting implementation, just to learn how they're actually doing things, as well as if you're in a place that doesn't have fully 100% RCV capable equipment, because maybe you have a lot of hand count jurisdictions or something like that, what the options are and what are some good case studies for kind of doing those workarounds to get RCV capable capability. So now that we've talked about 2025 a lot, Chris and I have been thinking about 2027, as usual, planning ahead. And so Chris and I have always been bouncing around ideas with the whole RCV-RC team. And so here are a couple of things that we've been thinking about. As usual, we're still currently on pace for an update in 2027. And with our new interactive map on the landing page, something Chris and I have been exploring is what kind of data tools can we use for the county or municipal level within a state. So you can look more granularly at what the RCV capability is kind of at a glance and visually as well. And then we've also added some information on remote ballot marking devices, but it's still an area that we don't know fully about and just want to keep learning more. It's not the most widely used technology, so there's still more to learn about it. And one of the questions we have gotten a lot recently is about the recommendation for timeline of implementation. We have general resources that we've included elsewhere, just in general throughout the Resource Center, but that's not something we've dug into specifically in RCV Maps, and that's something we've thought about including just general timelines for ranked choice voting implementation, including in the actual assessment for a state. And then lastly, this is probably pretty relevant for a state's timeline of implementation. One of the things we've talked about is the idea of measuring a state's centralization. So trying to understand the dynamics within a state's election system as to whether or not it tends to be a top-down or bottoms-up kind of system, whether it's the state that tends to really lead, do they purchase all the equipment, or is it the local governments, the counties or the municipalities that purchase all of their own equipment and you get a lot more variety? Do they handle a lot of the different things at the voter education pieces like that at the local level? So trying to find out, what kind of measurement we can do to come up with to measure the hierarchy of a state or how hierarchical it is. And this is something we've looked at doing regardless of RCV implementation, but it might be interesting to look at, just understand what the current state of the states are. And then as always, we are open to feedback. I know Chris mentioned that, and we've actually gotten new ideas on things from people who have been interested in reading RCV maps. We've gotten previous ideas that come from that created our voter registration tables and included some of that information in the 2023 assessment. And then this time around, we got a request for information on multi-vendor capabilities and centralization. And that's one thing we included in this assessment. So if you have ideas or thoughts, we're definitely open to exploring them and seeing whether it's a fit for RCV Maps or something else. I think that's everything I have. I'll turn it over to Tiffany.
All right, so we are going to move on to our free-for-all Q&A with the remaining time. And thank you for submitting your questions, and go ahead and keep submitting some more questions as we go through the Q&A, and we're going to try to get through as many as we can in the remaining time. And any unanswered questions will be covered in a post-webinar Q&A doc published on our website.
Oh, we lost Tiffany. Ryan is back. His video is now working.
Okay.
Who else was having that problem? But it was, if I was like on a different tab, I could see Ryan's video, but not on the regular tab.
Yeah, I apologize for that, everyone.
Okay. So should we start answering some questions? Are there any that stand out that we should answer first?
So we have one here. Can you talk a little bit about expected updates from the different hardware vendors, especially increasing the number of candidates and multi-winner races and native tallying?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about this. So one thing we do actually that is linked in one of the many footnotes that Ryan mentioned, I maybe am too attached to footnotes, but is we track the current ranked choice voting capability of every single voting system vendor in a document that we call voting system capabilities and ranked choice voting, which tries to be descriptive, and that covers what each vendor's like state of the art ranked choice voting capability, including how many rankings voters will get in ranked choice voting contests, the types of RCV, because there are sort of many different flavors of ranked choice voting that exist out there, the types of RCV those systems can handle, and like Blake asked in that question, whether any of those vendors can process ranked choice voting data internally within their system, or if they need to export the data to a third-party software like the Resource Center's RCTab software. We don't know a ton yet about future developments. We know that there's a couple vendors who are currently going out for EAC certification, Election Assistance Commission certification of their equipment, that have some updated ranked choice voting capabilities. But we don't yet know the full extent of those. As soon as we do know that, we will be sure to update that document. Maybe we should send that link in the chat too. See if I can find it quickly.
Okay, so I know you guys touched a little bit on Maine and Alaska and how they have some hand count precincts and areas. Do you want to expand on that anymore? We do have a question in the chat about that. If you have some hand count towns, can you still have RCV? Just, you have to make a plan for what to do with those ballots.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. And then Chris, I don't know if there's anything you might want to add at the end, but I do think like those assessments, I'll say, are first off, are definitely worth reading just for that information alone. But basically what they end up doing is with those hand count towns, they centralize that data. And so in that case means physically flying the ballots themselves into a central location within the state. And so whether that's the state capital, but then they will take those ballots and they will put them through a high-speed scanner and then get that. They will be able to take that ballot data and then be able to combine it with the rest of the ballot data that had been collected from the other jurisdictions in the state that had RCV capable equipment, and then be able to run the tabulation just like kind of normal at that point, because then they'll have had all that data that goes from the ballots to basically a big Excel spreadsheet.
Correct. And I think the question is right. Their instinct is right. Like, you just need to make a plan in your state. If you're running things statewide for what you think is the best option for getting those hand count ballots included in the full RCV round by round count. We actually have a little box in the report that sort of touches on the different options available, and talks about, what Alaska and Maine do just with sending those hand count ballots to a central location, or other options like scanning them locally instead.
And I'll also add too about Alaska. They had, in the very beginning, considered purchasing election equipment for those hand count jurisdictions, because obviously then they'd be able to just send that information in without having to fly those ballots in and then scan them there in Juneau. But in looking at the budget that they had for implementation and all of that, they decided that it would just be best to keep those hand count jurisdictions. But that is another option, of course, for places who have these hand count towns, is to maybe buy equipment that can do an RCV election. Okay, so something else with the hardware here. This person says, I thought Vermont had the hardware required in all towns that used voting machines, but hadn't paid to do the software since there wasn't a statewide law to use RCV yet.
Ryan, you want to take that one? I think you wrote Vermont, right?
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to remember the specific for Vermont. Because I think they had, I'm going off memory here, I think they had a number of hand count towns, and it might be that they had ballot marking devices that were RCV capable. But our ballot marking devices, typically, they don't use it for the number of voters that you'd need for a whole election. So they have equipment, but we wouldn't consider it, the usable for everybody in that sense. It's not as scalable.
Yeah, I just pulled up Vermont's assessment, and yeah, we give them a prepping for RCV because 70% of towns in Vermont have ranked choice voting capable equipment, and the other 29% of towns, 30% of towns, hand count, which is why we gave them that score. And this is actually a good time to note. So there's a voting system vendor now known as Liberty Vote, formerly known as Dominion, who changed their name just as we were finishing up drafting all 50 plus DC of these assessments. So in the full assessments, we still are referring to Dominion because we didn't plan on them changing their name as we were finishing up the assessments. We actually mentioned this in the FAQ on the website too, but we are planning to update all of those assessments early next year with the correct name for this voting system vendor. We don't want to confuse people. We want to make sure we're referring to it as Liberty, not Dominion. But everything else on the website and the fact sheets too does refer to them as Liberty, not as Dominion. But just wanted to make sure to note that to everybody, that we know we are planning to update those. It was just the timing was not great, unfortunately.
Yeah. You realize Dominion is mentioned more than a dozen times in every single place. And
you're like, well,
yeah, we're like, this is a problem that we're going to have to address a little bit later.
I want to just jump back to the Vermont thing. So Ryan, can you explain, just in case people don't know, what is a ballot marking device? How is that different from the rest of the equipment?
Yeah, so it's designed as an accessible voting equipment. And so they're all a little bit different, but they're designed to help voters with disabilities be able to cast their ballot, whether they're hard of hearing or hard of sight, anything like that. So they have a couple of different adaptations to it. And we also have some example pictures in the assessment of what that equipment looks like. I don't think we have every single vendor as the actual physical equipment. Some of them we had a hypothetical example because we weren't able to get that from them. But just a different visual. And Chris, I don't know if there's anything you might want to add there as well.
No, that's all that is good to know about those.
All right, so we have a question here. Can you repeat the difference between capable and prepping for? I'm surprised that Virginia is still prepping.
I can talk a bit about Virginia specifically. I wonder, Virginia should be scored as RCV capable. But it is a strict rule. The minute you're below 100% of jurisdictions with RCV capable equipment, we throw you in prepping. The reason for that is this is approaching, all of these assessments are scoring places based on what it would take to do ranked choice voting statewide, not necessarily at the city or county level. Oh, that's a good note, Jane. Thank you for flagging that. I guess we have miscolored Virginia on the map, though it is at least correct in the reports and on the website. But we'll make sure to update the map that to make sure Virginia is, scored as prepping when it should be RCV capable. But we are, like, the way the scoring works is the minute any jurisdiction has non-RCV capable equipment, even if every single other city or county in the state does, we will throw them in prepping, because you need everything to have RCV capable equipment to run a ranked choice voting election at the state level.
We have another question here. Thank you for your excellent work. Will this session recording be uploaded somewhere?
Yes, we will have it up on our website, and I think we'll put it on YouTube as well, where you can also find a lot of our old and previous webinars as well.
All right, very cool. And does anybody have any other questions? Because I might have one. I'll go ahead and ask mine for now while we wait for anything else. So what was the hardest part about the RCV Maps project?
I would say getting started, I feel like, is the hardest spot, at least it felt like for me, because we have to, like, figure out all of the different areas. Like, creating the template feels like it's half the project itself, and then the other half just drafting and going through the graphic design. Because once you start with making the template and then you start going from there, any changes after that, I mean, you have to do it to all the other assessments you've already drafted. So trying to make sure we address and do all the right research to cover all the new issues and things like that in the template, I think, was probably the hardest part. And then going from there, it felt like, a little bit of rinse and repeat for 26 states each about.
I think the hardest part was doing it the first time. We started it in 2021, and just making it at all was hard. And, like, making sure it was properly planned out, and we had, it was just a big challenge to try and crunch all of this information down into something a little more standardized was the hard part the first time around. This time it was juggling between now and 2021. I think the ranked choice voting space has changed a lot. We've got more to do as an organization on working on implementations. There's just more happening around the country. And so balancing that, fitting this giant project in with our existing work streams was, I think, the big challenge for me this year.
All right, looks like we got some more questions. Trying to scroll to them. Where did they go? Here we go. So is Idaho a state? Wait, so Idaho a state has.
I think so. If
a state,
okay, so if a state has a single hand count town, they will be prepping until after they run an actual RCV election, at which time they will be RCV ready.
Yeah,
I would say, I mean, if Alaska and Maine didn't already have RCV elections, they would be in the prepping for category. They get a little bit of special treatment in the sense that, like, they're already doing it, so they have found their workaround to it, and so they are RCV ready because they are actively doing it.
Okay. Are there differences in how jurisdictions handle ties in RCV elections?
I would say the vast majority of jurisdictions decide tie by lot. So basically pick a name out of a hat, flip a coin, shorter stick, whatever. And I think NCSL has some interesting research on that just in general about elections. When it comes to RCV, I don't know if we have any, if I like check the hard data on this, but I think they're also the majority of which are handle it by lot. A lot of it, I think, usually is determined by what state law is. So they're usually subject to that. And then I think there are a handful of places that do either look backwards or look forwards method where they look at some of the previous results from round by round count, whether that's the most immediately previous round or the first round in the entire contest. But there are a couple of different options when you have some of that ranking data, but I would say the vast majority handle it by lot.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, we tend to suggest people do it by lot because ties are really rare already, and I generally find it simpler to explain a process you've already done or already have in place than it is to add another new process to something like RCV. Of course, I can't control what people are going to do. We've seen places use all of those different options that Ryan mentioned, but we do tend to suggest, like, if you're already using lots to break ties elsewhere, keep doing that for RCV as well.
Okay. Do you have any RCV implementation plans you can share?
We have some very broad plans. I'm trying to think if we have anything specific that's like, do this time, do this thing this week, this thing the next week. Here's how you should structure like each month running up to an election day. I don't believe we have anything like that, but Tiffany, I'm curious if you guys made anything like that in Alaska.
Not a totally written down thing as far as like the entire implementation plan, especially to like, I know our RCVRC is always telling people you have to be very flexible when you're implementing something like this. And so I'll say for myself, I developed an education plan, and in the end, it turned out pretty different from what I had come up with 2 years before that. And so, but no, we didn't have, I would say, a very extensive written down sort of a plan, other than, you know, a lot of different talks and meetings and things like that, and notes from those meetings.
Yeah. And I'll just say, like, if there's a jurisdiction who's interested in working on an implementation plan, we're happy to partner with you and help you put that together based on our knowledge and expertise from working in previous ranked choice voting implementations, because we do have some sense of the overall timeline and are happy to help structure that.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we do have a tool, RCV in a Box, which is designed around getting you like 80% of the way there when it comes to a lot of the resources, materials to come up with an implementation plan. It has some generic timelines in there, and it's got other resources as well as examples of other voter education plans and things like that. And I think we did a webinar on it too. So if you are looking on YouTube and you come across this one, you can always go back in our history and find that one too.
And we have a follow-up question. Is breaking ties by lot the method for the pre-final round eliminations? For example, if two candidates are tied in the second round, does one get eliminated at random to move to the third round?
Yeah, there might be some jurisdictions that vary their tie-breaking method by whether it's between like the final candidates or in the final round or in previous rounds, but in the vast majority of jurisdictions, there is a single tie-breaking rule that applies to any round of counting.
All right. Okay, so did you perform some type of needs assessment? And if so, what did you do it based on?
I wonder, is that question going to you, Tiffany, from your Alaska experience? Because we didn't do a needs assessment before we did RCV Maps.
It sounds like maybe it may have been mine. So I will say I joined the State of Alaska Division of Elections in 2020, and they had already done some of the background work at that point before, you know, the ballot measure was actually passed, to kind of see what were they going to need as far as software upgrades and things like that. And how much were those going to cost with Dominion/Liberty vote, and kind of, those sort of things to also come up with a budget should the ballot measure pass, which of course it did pass in 2020. So I think a lot of that groundwork was done even before the ballot measure passed. And that's something that we recommend also that jurisdictions do, is before it's even a thing yet over there, just start kind of doing the research and looking into the voter equipment you have and things like that. And that's where Maps is really helpful and really comes in to kind of see, how capable are you in your jurisdiction, and even whether that's a county or a city or a state. So always a good idea to start ahead of time. Okay, and so we have another one. We have a citizen who always argues to the legislature that they should use Condorcet instead of the tallying that is used in Maine and Alaska. Does any jurisdiction use a head-to-head process for tallying anywhere in the US, Europe, Australia, or Malta? Does any large, well-known organization like the Academy Awards, a national or international professional organization, etc., use anything like Condorcet? That's kind of a long one. Sorry, guys. I should have broken that up.
I think the answer is pretty short. I'm not aware of any governmental election, so like one used to elect people serving as elected representatives, as mayors, city councilors, members of the House of a legislature anywhere, uses any Condorcet method. I won't get into explaining what Condorcet is to everyone here. We are now at 4 o'clock. It's just another form of election using a ranked ballot, but I'm not aware of any governmental election using it. I've not even heard of high profile uses of it within organizational bodies. Like the Academy Awards actually uses either single winner ranked choice voting for winners in many of their categories, and uses proportional ranked choice voting to select a lot of their nominees in a lot of those different categories. And there are other ranked ballot methods used for like MVP races that are voted on in like the NFL or the NBA. But I don't believe any of them use a Condorcet method, as far as I know.
Okay, so like Chris was saying, we're about coming to the end of our webinar here. And so again, if you have any questions, you can just shoot those over to us and we will do our best to answer those. And then of course, include them in the Q&A that we're going to publish on our website. So for more information about the webinar or the services we offer, please visit our website at rcvresources.org. You can follow us on social media to stay updated with the latest RCVRC information. As a nonprofit, we depend on the support of our donors to host presentations like this and to continue our work with jurisdictions across the country, ensuring trustworthy, accurate RCV elections. If you enjoyed today's presentation, please consider making a donation to our end of the year campaign. And you can donate directly on the website or scan the QR code on the screen. And thank you so much again for attending today's presentation. And we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.